Welcome back. In our prior videos, we showed you how to, we're going to register a user, create a volunteer record, how to assign a role to that user. So how do we manage the roles? What I mean to say is, how does ASP know who has what pages they can have, what directories they can have? Um, Let me show you. In the web config for the application, there's a couple of different parts. First is the authentication mode. We're going to use forms authentication, and the login URL. This is going to be a redirect anytime we have an issue with authentication or authorization. Authentication just simply means a user password or some way the user is authenticated. Authorization is when a user is in a particular role or not. So whenever any of those fail, you are immediately returned back to the login ASPX. What happens is an HTTP error is kicked whenever either authentication or authorization fails. It's either a 401 or a 403. And depending on if I get a 401 or 403, the IAS is going to detect that that's a 401 or 403, change the HTTP code to a 302, which is a redirect, and then redirect you back into login. So how does it know to redirect you to login or not? Well, on the application level, we have an authorization tag, and what this says is deny users question mark, allow users star. It's basically a rule set. So what this first one says is deny users question mark. If the user is not authenticated, which is that question mark, then he fails, and we're going to throw him to the login form. Just because a user authenticates doesn't mean he has access to your application. There's also some things that you have to keep available for anybody. Let me show you what I'm talking about. In the root of the application, after it's compiled, there's going to be a file that you have to be able to see. Telerik.web.ui.webresource.ext. That is a file that's used for JavaScript. So if you don't allow a user to see this, your JavaScript won't work on your page. So you have to give everybody access to that, and that's what the allow users is. This is a location tag underneath the configuration tag in web config. I also have to give them access to the account directory. Otherwise, they won't be able to log in. So imagine if I told them to redirect to login.aspx, but I don't give them access to login.aspx. You have to give them access to be able to log in. Now this will give everybody access to this directory to be able to browse to the pages, but I don't want to give the users all those pages. In other words, under account, I've got forgot password, login, manage role, manage user, and register so far. So if I give them that, they can see any of these pages. I don't have a problem with them seeing login or register or forgot password, but manage role and manage user I don't want them to have. You can certainly sit in the root web config and figure all those things out in your root web config, but it can get kind of unwieldy. You can imagine this can go on and on if you have many different folders. So the rules of the game are you can have a web config for each folder level. So I added another web config under the account. We call that web config as well. This one's a little bit different. This one says, now remember, I already have access to web config. I'm there. And under account, I have two pages, manage role.aspx and manage user.aspx. What I'm doing is I'm saying allow the user if they have the admin role, deny users question mark, which will mean if they fall through this, they don't have the role, then deny users question mark would put them back to the admin, or excuse me, the login screen. And if in other words, okay, so let me say this again. The user is already logged in. They don't have the role. They all are authenticated. If they're sitting right here, in other words, they pass these two, we want to deny them outright. So this is what's going to actually kick them back to the login screen. He's not authorized. He is authenticated. He goes back to the login screen. We did that for each one. So let's test to see if this works. I'm going to stop my application. I was running already. I'm going to start my application. Now, what should happen is, and I can set this anywhere, but if I put any of the pages, any start page, the start page will get overridden by that first web config by this web config where it says deny users question mark. That means if it's not one of these kind of pages, then make him authenticate, no matter what. So even if I stumbled into sample addresses or stumbled into the volunteer page, if I'm not authenticated, I get this screen. I'm going to authenticate and log in. Now, if you take a look at the URL, I can't make it any bigger, but it automatically puts in, when we do the login, it automatically puts in that string, the return URL. So it knows where to return you after the login is complete. It's going to return me back to the manage roles page. I click login. Oh, what happened? Did it log me in? It did log me in, but it failed because Chase Utley does not have manage role. It doesn't have the admin role. So manage role kicks him back to the login screen. Okay, so you can see I'm logged in. I'm logged in as Chase Utley, but here I am sitting in the login screen. Let's go back to I went to the back end and I'm going to manually tweak these by hand. There's just two stored procedures: add users to role and remove users from role. What I'm going to do is add Chase to the admin role. He's added to the admin role. So if I go back here and I just simply hit refresh, if I go back here, there we go. I had to authenticate to make that happen. Manage role, I am sitting on there's nothing here. There's nothing part of the page, but I'm sitting on the manage role page. I authenticated and I'm authorized to see this page. If I take myself out of the role, which is this one, remove users from role, Chase Utley admin, execute. I'm out of the role. If I refresh this page, it's going to sense that I'm out of the role and kick me back to the login form. Now, it's for a different lesson, but what I would like to see is if you're authenticated and you're not authorized to do something, I'd rather not see the login page. I'd rather see a different page. There's a tricky way of doing that. Definitely not for this lesson, but what we have to do is sense to see whether he was redirected on a login or redirected on an authentication or redirected on an authorization. ASP, the vanilla ASP doesn't make that distinction. It just says he failed and back to the login screen you go. But the user, not knowing that he didn't have the role, may not understand why they're back at this page. Now, it simplifies a lot of things. Having the authorization authentication model in the web config simplifies a ton of things. Now, the difference is, though, what if I wanted to have a page where certain people saw a certain part of the view of the data and certain people saw a different view of the data? For instance, a group admin may want to be able to remove users from their group. A group participant may want to remove themselves. I don't want to have to write that page twice. Now, the rule is these are page directives and path directives. He has account, he has managed role. But there's nothing at the web config level to say a person has this part of the page or not. What you have to do is in the either in the code behind or in the ASP, interrogate the roles table, just like we did. There's one of the pages where we said is in role. Let's see, in the register. In register, we added a user to a role. Under here, we said add users to role, and we added whoever is logging in to the default role. Well, instead of add users to role, I can look to see is user in role. And if user is in role, I can show or not show controls. I have a total control at that point. The reason why we don't do page or directory in the code behind it is because it's not necessary. If I want to turn off or on a whole page or a whole directory, it's much easier to do with the location tag and much more easily readable than dealing with the roles individually. Another thing we can do, here we have admin role. I showed you before how you can use settings to point this to the web config. That's not a bad idea. So in other words, I want to go to one place in my web config, in my root web config, to know what the different roles are. Remember I said the default role was, oh, it stuck it somewhere. The default role was volunteer. I may want to say manager role as a key and have that pointing to admin. Just makes it a lot easier. In other words, one place I know where all the roles are described in the web config. The next video is going to be showing you how to look at the roles in the code behind this to turn off or on controls. Great. Thanks a lot.